In calculations, we have to reduce the number of options where we take samples from. In reality, the light bounces in an infinite number of rays and an infinite number of bounces in a scene. And that is pretty much impossible to render because the calculation would take exactly an infinite amount of time. In reality, there is no calculation needed. It just happened in real time with light speed, so to say. But that is not a given in computers. So we have to live with something that comes close to it. And we get more and more stable results. So maybe what I'm talking about here is maybe history in 1 or 2 years completely. The results are more stable than ever. But we have to think about that we can shoot only a limited number of rays into the scene to explore what finally illuminates the whole scene. Panoramas, and that is the major theme here, and it's not global illumination, panoramas in this way have tons of information. And the more details we have around the scene here, for example, the more a randomly shot out ray can hit maybe a dark area or a bright area. We have, of course, options here to say, hey, there's a light source. Have a look to that. Go more to this one. It's more important. And so we get more and more intelligent solutions to get finally exactly the light that is maybe stable from one frame to the next frame. And we get more and more calculations that have a look around time-wise and not only spatial. There is, of course, something possible that we can do. If that is needed in the moment you hear about me talking, this is always a question, what is the next update? What is the stability now? So let's have a look in Photoshop what we can do about that. In Photoshop, finally, we see this image here again, and we have, of course, discussed this in the HDRI series. The more important part is here, of course, to decide from the start what quality is needed in terms of resolution and of dynamic. And dynamic means here, when I go here to that slider, that we have values here in it that go far beyond 100% or 1.0, whatever scale you like to use. And even this sun here goes beyond what Photoshop can normally deal with. And I'll show you that when I go here just to the color picker and I go here to the sun. Have a look to the RGB values here. It goes to 20 and there is nothing above. So there is inside of Photoshop some kind of clipping when I go here with these color values. And for example, this value here, which is not exactly where the sun is, it's more a little bit on the side. We have here red is way above what this application can handle, and green and blue is below that. That sounds maybe not really a problem, but I will show you later on where the problem is. That is something where I would think, we can maybe replace the sun here because it's only one light source and we avoid this problem. When we have a lot of these things, maybe when we have an indoor illumination and we have tons of lights that reach to exactly this situation, we have perhaps a problem. Because specular highlights, for example, are not really white. They are only white because we have most of the time a clipping there. And when every 3 channels are clipped, the resulting color is white. And then we get exactly always white speculars. But in the moment we have a huge motion blur or we have depth of field, the colorization could have a little tint in it. And when we miss this, it looks artificial, CG-like. And that is a big problem, of course, when you have a critical audience. So what I have in mind here is, of course, first, if you have only one light source in a panorama, perhaps you paint sky over it and replace the whole thing with a good light source. In Cinema 4D you have not really a limitation like this here in Photoshop, and you can adjust this in a better way. Finally, you have then also, if chosen wisely, the right position to cast the right shadows here, which is not really a given with global illumination and in the best way. Okay, so having said that, we have already discussed some qualities of a panorama that we want to use for global illumination. 32-bit float per channel is of course very important to have to get all these values inside. Some people like OpenEXR with 16-bit half float, as the saying is. This is roughly only 18 stops over the gray card value. That's the definition of it, and that should be enough, but I'm not really certain if the sun is happy with such a limitation. Have an eye on that. A little refresher, when we have here a low dynamic range image, that could be 8-bit per channel, or that could be here just 16-bit per channel. I have here 8 to be really brutal with that. What I have in mind here is of course the same sun here, and when I switch here back to this image, we can't really see a difference in Photoshop in the preview. But in a moment I use here maybe the exposure, which is normally, so far I understand it, one stop here. When I put here a 1 into it, one stop over, or -1, one stop lower, half the light. And you see already we have here a gray value. That's horrible for the sun, of course. And when I go here even a little bit more, but with 3 stops, which is pretty much nothing for the sun, we have here a fairly good gray value. That's not really funny, and also the specular highlights go really down. This is unusable for anything. And of course some people like to use maybe even a tone mapped version for the background in 8-bit or 16-bit integer, whatever. This is all something where I think, why wasting all the quality that we have in HDRI and just to save some memory where we have to pay nearly nothing anymore compared to 1 or 2 decades before that. When we go into a really extreme color correction, or maybe only in a little bit color correction, 2 stops maybe in one area, we lose a lot of data, and anything that is limited to 100% or 1.0 will suffer greatly. And this is not only that I say, okay, we can go maybe from here again into 32-bit and get something out of it, but there's a huge limitation in it, and I want to show you that in this example here. This is an example here, and I have accelerated a lot here, of course. When you think about shooting an image in the evening and you have your camera on daylight, for example, then you might see that many light sources have a complete different color, and incandescent light have maybe a reddish, orangey or yellowish color. I have used here just red, and fluorescent light is from standard, when it should be white, it's more greenish. It has green little spikes in the frequency. And then we have of course also just daylight, for example, when we use a tungsten setting, warmish, and when daylight comes in it looks bluish. Anyway, this is extreme. Just to make the point, I show you that in the channels that we have in the blue channel, only this white, everything else is in the mid area. It's just roughly the greenish one and the reddish one. So we can say the green or the red, green and blue have always one channel, one part of the color just to 100%. And that means it might be clipped. It's most likely that the light source was not just 100%. It was most likely above that value. So this channel is already a little bit clipped. It would be much hotter if you had used HDRI, 32-bit float, or whatever. Integer is dangerous for anything where you want to work later on and inside of 3D. I highly recommend to just avoid it whenever possible. I want to show you why. When we go now here with just an exposure, and I give only 3 stops above this, happens, then everything is white already, and we can't see a thing here in terms of differentiation. 3 stops, not a lot of stuff. And of course, sometimes we do this. We do this on purpose, maybe to equalize everything. Not really a good idea. If we go with this into our work and we save this, and we go then back and say, okay, we try to get it back, even when we go into After Effects or wherever in 32-bit space. And then we say, we know we got 3 stops too much, and we go down and everything is gone, because everything hits the 100% ceiling, and we go from there down, not from the maximum value that it would have in 32-bit. And the funny thing is, if we go now and flip only the direction, we get everything back, because that's possible. First down and then up, because then we don't hit the ceiling. In 32-bit that would look completely different. And we can do this here, of course. We go here to mode, 32-bit, just like that, don't flatten it. And now I can swap them out in the way I want, because these values get not clipped when they hit the ceiling of 100%. Now I can play with it, and I can do it even very extremely. Let's say negative 12 stops. And here also plus 12 stops. And I get everything back, because it works up and down. There's no ceiling, no clipping, and in that moment I get my colors back. And that's most of the time, as we have seen, the reason why light look always white in bad illuminated images, because it has a clipping, and all these colors vanish because they are on the white setting point of that image. That's all. And there's of course a reason why I suggest, and I get not tired about this, skip integer footage whenever you can. So back to our initial idea of rays that get shot into the space, and in Cinema 4D, when we have a panorama wrapped around the scene, then the space is limited by this panorama here, of course. And limited is then always a question which quality we had, how many stops we were able to capture from each light source, and so on. These rays goes, of course, in all directions, and when we have tons of lights, they might hit the light source or they might not hit the light source. And one of these ideas to work against it is to blur an image, and before that to scale it down. So make it smaller, blur it, and have an eye on the values, that they are all very nice and that they were not clipped before already. That is why I talked about this as well, even in this area here in Photoshop, where 20 is pretty much the ceiling. And the smaller this is, the larger the areas become then later inside of the panorama. As you can see this here, when I go, this little highlight here, that might be hit one time by a ray, and exactly this frame has then a light source that is based here on that specular highlight. And in the next frame it goes maybe to this place, and then it's bluish from that area. And then it goes to that area of the tube and it's brown. And there comes that flickering and noise into the game. So we can imagine when we have this blooming in a huge way here, which is of course a little bit wrong because it's only a specular highlight. But if a ray hits this area here, it's most likely that the next ray might hit it as well. And we get more stability in it. That is of course wrong to have a specular highlight blooming that way, but this is my example here. And the more blurriness we have here, without losing really the light information here, the more stable our image will be. And the more wrong it will be, of course. So it's a two-sided coin, of course. It is suggested from time to time in HDRI books and in tutorials. I wanted to discuss this here, and when you have a problem with flickering and the algorithm in Cinema 4D can't help you with that, this would be a way out. Make it smaller, it saves RAM, and blur it, of course. Have an eye on the maximum values so you get roughly your scene back. How to set this up in Cinema 4D? Let's hop over to Cinema 4D and have a look. In Cinema 4D I need some materials, and I want to say the global illumination is maybe represented by an orangey color. So we get this here. Maybe I have to pull a little bit green out of it. Green and yellowish for this. And for the reflection I want to have something in the opposite direction, of course. Then I go here into that area and have that color in this way. So the bluish is maybe for the reflection and the orangey is for exactly the global illumination. To use global illumination I have to switch this on here in effects and global illumination, and then we need only two materials, one time for an object that can receive just global illumination, and we want to have one material that just reflects everything. So I split it up now everything so you can see how it works. We need of course two objects, a torus and maybe a sphere. The sphere practically my chrome sphere, and the torus here, the one that catches the light. We need then, for example, the sky object, or we can use two spheres very largely, and the sky should be here the one that gets the reflection. And for the global illumination I take here just a sphere and set the radius very high so we have no parallax problems, maybe even one more zero here into that, and that becomes now the orange. If I would render this, and I do this just to show you what happens, then the sky object would be completely excluded based on a sphere here. So we have to do something here to get the bluish part of that into the reflection again, because that was what we wanted to have, the orange for the light and the sky for the reflection. Okay, so the first thing is of course we need for both a compositing tag. I select here both so I don't have to do it twice. Tag, Cinema 4D tags, and compositing tag is the one that we want to have. So the first one is now only for global illumination. So we don't want to have anything here with reflection, for example. We could switch also this one here off. It depends on you. Seen by RO, ambient occlusion, perhaps because it is maybe always together with the global illumination. And I switch this here out so you can compare this in a better way. And then I go here to the next one for the reflection only, not seen by GI, not seen by AO. And we have to take care about the obscuration of the sphere here to the sky. That means we put these here completely out, and then we have another look here. What happens here? It calculates the light here, and then we hope that the sphere gets here something in blue. And exactly that's the case now. We can see here now the background of our GI rendering that has to do here with the scene by camera. We can switch both off, and we do it then again. So it renders first the light, and then we get the reflection as well, and nothing in the background. And the background would be then in high res that we can use for real picture work, and it should be also in HDRI from my point of view. I will leave some words about this when we talk about the SIBL idea. Okay, this sums it up for the moment, and get comfortable with the compositing tag. It's a very important part in the work with all of these, and which diameter the sphere should have in your scene depends highly on the scale that you use, of course. I can make here only an example and try to make something work here. When you remember the parts before, the resolution for the reflection is highly dependent on your objects and how they are created finally, if they are concave, convex or flat. And of course the GI is not so demanding in terms of resolution, spatial wise, X and Y, but it's more the dynamic range that needs really to fit and has no clipped values at all, not based on any steps between where even floating point values can be clipped. It should have everything in it that the dynamic range can give you. Just a little hint on the end, because what I like to do is to select all materials that only give light information into the scene. We don't want to have them as receiver in the calculation. If that always matters, I don't know. I have the feeling that some of the GI methods or algorithm won't even bother to really look into that. But for peace of mind, so to say, receive GI I switch this off, and then I have no doubt that my scene is, at least in this point, optimized. Thanks for listening. Have fun with it. Bye bye.